Hello to my family, friends, and audience. This is Sunny Sharma at India Inside Movement and India Inside Movement and India Insight with Sunny Sharma. I'm back with my part two discussion, Why Voting Really Matters, Season 9, Episode 4. Now let's get started. Another revolutionary period is needed in this country, and in some sense, it began with the reaction to the disastrous Iraq War and Hurricane Katrina effort that laid bare the racism embedded in imperialist narrative, not just of America, but of countries around the globe. Behind any revolutionary movement is a theoretical framework constructed in large part by academics, organizers, and leaders of the 21st century and before. Eugene Debs laid the revolutionary theoretical framework for President FDR, just as President Obama's resounding treatise on political engagement has laid the blueprint for change for our generation. What is most apparent from this political treatise is the notion that the American people get the politicians that reflect their own political agency and inaction. This idea was shared by India's very own Dr. Ambedkar, who also foreshadowed that if we don't have representatives who share our political values, these representatives will be the masters of the inactive and indifferent public. Many American citizens throughout American history, including our leaders, are frustrated with our unequal political system. Malcolm X expressed this sentiment in The Ballot or the Bullet speech when, in the election year of 1964, he denounced the two party duopoly's attempts to placate the black community so as to gain their vote, but ignored their basic needs during non election years. It is clear from these luminaries that the only way to confront the mainstream media narrative control that has only grown more corrosive as time has gone by is to mobilize our own shift in the moral narrative by energizing working class people to vote for the first time. This is the thesis of the newly developed Poor People's Campaign, founded by Dr. King in 1968 and reconstituted by Bishop William Barber and Pastor Liz Theoharis in 2018. The mainstream media and, as an extension, social media both develop wide-scale tribalism that in many ways generates communal feeling in similar measure to many unstable developing nations. This is the reason that political education is so important to developing a new voter base. Furthermore, there must be a greater emphasis on local decision making, not just in small towns and communities, but in the workplace, particularly through the generation of unions. These unions may not be totally altruistic through collective solidarity, but for many people, especially poorer demographics in the past, unionized workplaces were the first places where people could exercise voting power and some semblance of equality in decision making. We must interrogate why voting is so important. Does voting, as I insist, lead away from communalism towards individual liberty and from timeless tradition to social justice? Voting requires an informed moral citizenry, as our founding fathers emphasized. If such a constituency is not present, it typically results in little progress. Citizens become informed through political education through something called the marketplace or arena of ideas, which involves innovative and creative leaders developing theories of change that help propel movements which work in tandem with their leaders to reassess strategy periodically in order to solve problems. This has typically been in the realm of new parties, but in our current era of draconian electoral laws that discourage good natured people from participating, there is a tendency towards a worse political climate. What needs to be most clear to the audience of this writing is that the electoral laws in America must be reformed if politics is to get better, not just in America, but around the world. There are 7 action steps that must take place to ensure our experiment in self-government endures. 1. The disastrous 2009 Citizens United decision that made unlimited donations to super PACs a form of free speech must be abolished to level the political playing field for stellar working class candidates. 2. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act must be passed, which is the most radical voting rights legislation currently that targets states with a history of voting discrimination, like my home state of Georgia, to be liable by law to protect citizen voting rights. 3, the public education system must be substantially reformed to inform people of civic engagement through a variety of political education recommendations so young people are prepared to take office locally or in the community, which can encourage idealism for unlimited progress over disappointing status quo power plays. 4, there must be a development of an anti-tyranny culture that encourages people to question the government so that a fifth American Revolution can occur. 5, there must be a decrease in the election funding cycle to less than 6 months so political representatives can focus on governance rather than campaigning. 6, gerrymandering, which forces unrealistic boundaries on complex historical landscapes, must be standardized so the most self-interested parties don't have the most influence, which inevitably leads to problems for poor and working class people. And lastly, 7, there must be avenues for new political parties to emerge to offer new public policy platforms to reform government when the two-party duopoly proves to be inadequate for providing for the common welfare of all. This last step in the process also involves making it easier for new candidates to get on the debate stage with mainstream parties, get on the ballot, and generally allowing them equal opportunity at proposing their own value system and how they embody it when it comes to political races in the future. New parties have had a tremendous impact on the history of America. The newly formed Republican Party led to the abolishment of slavery legislatively. The Bull Moose Party and Socialist Party led to new standards of living and inspired radical New Deal public policy in the 1930s. The Black Panther Party, like many parties before, questioned real public safety, basic needs, innovative organizational strategies, creative civic engagement, and the capitalist system. The 1980s New Alliance Party ran the first Black woman for president by forming a national coalition for change. The Green Party questioned corporate hegemony and environmental protections. The Libertarian Party assisted the development of new social legislation and put to question whether local community building was deteriorating in the time of big government. The 21st Century Democratic Party fostered a new vocabulary concerning poverty, inequality, and a blueprint for running successful social media campaigns at the local and national level still used today. These are just a handful of the many political movements in America that served as the coalitions of concerned Americans who organized to change the status quo. These movements weren't always peaceful. In fact, they were frequently violent. What hasn't changed is the imperative of citizenship. Not just rights, which, if we are honest with ourselves, have been decreasing in value with every election since the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights drafted by Eleanor Roosevelt, but what fundamental duties must we uphold as citizens of this country? This focus on duty must be reignited in the 21st century. There has been a systematic effort to diminish the economic power of marginalized people in Georgia, going back to the end of Reconstruction in 1877. Georgia, like many places in the South, saw a boom in Black legislative representation during Reconstruction. But over a 25-year period, nearly every Black politician was pushed out of office nationally and locally. There are many efforts to reverse this trend by many of the leaders I've mentioned and others, either through education or legislation. But it is undoubtable that Atlanta, Georgia used to be a place for Black middle-class excellence, as reflected in a booming social housing industry. Today, Atlanta ranks as one of the worst places for public housing. Due to gentrification, many marginalized people have been pushed out of the city, and though there are wealthy minority families outside the city limits, it has only become more difficult for working class people to survive throughout the state. The key to changing this ongoing trend is not just for more people to become politically involved. We must also radically inspire disillusioned poor and working class people of their voting power so much that we definitively change the economic structure of our most unequal cities across America. In every watershed moment of American history, and in between, voting has been essential to the constructing of a more perfect union in line with the aspirations of the American experiment in self-government. Yet, if you were to ask anyone, it is typically the most affected Americans who understand the value of citizenship the most. These citizens are typically the most marginalized people historically, as best outlined by the very people most affected by legislative victories, whether it was the New Deal, Great Society legislation, the 2010 ACA, etc. These very same people are also typically the most excluded in terms of metrics of belonging, inclusivity, and acceptance in public life. It was past generations who had to directly face oppression's gun. If we were to lose our voting privileges due to ignorance or apathy, it will be directly related to our misunderstanding of the seriousness, sensitivity, conviction, and extent to which past generations fought for our most cherished of values, citizenship. Thank you for listening to my two-part series on why voting really matters. And just to encourage my audience, early voting has started in Georgia, April 27th, which is today. And essentially, all politics is local. Any serious movement for change or any serious social movement began at a very local level, and they typically began in places where one, there were there were immense structural inequities and inequalities, and two, there was signs of an organized capacity for a social movement to begin. And this happened especially during the civil rights movement, for example, especially in places like Birmingham and Selma, Alabama, and even occurred in places like Chicago. So I want to encourage people to vote in their local elections, especially because changing local politics is the key to start changing the nation as a whole. So I thank you for listening, and I'll be back with future episodes to come. Thank you.